The sea had thrown up its dead. That was how Lao Zhang, the dock watchman, put it when the first cluster of villagers leaned over the rail. By the time Officer Xiaowen rattled up on her moped, half the town was already gathered along the harbour, pressed shoulder to shoulder. There were only 4 officers at the Turtle Bay station: Captain Lin, Officer Lai, whom everyone called Lai Ge, Officer Wu Tianqiang, Qiang to the locals, and the newest one, Li Xiaowen. Gulls wheeled overhead. Ropes slapped against the wooden pilings. The smell came in layers: salt, rotting fish, diesel, then something faintly sweet and sour beneath it, like fruit left too long in a warm room. "Make way, police," Captain Lin called, his voice carrying across the planks. His short-sleeved uniform was already dark with sweat, his cap pushed too far back. Authority and fatigue shared the same posture. He didn't look at Xiaowen as she slipped in behind him, eyes lowered, following the narrow path he cut through the bodies and murmurs. Yellow tape stretched from a boat cleat to a rusted bollard, a crooked line in the glare. Beyond it lay the drowned man. Old fishermen with towels around their necks, housewives still in their slippers, children craning for a look at something they only half understood. The body lay on its back, eyes half closed, lips dark. His shirt clung to him like a second skin, the fabric torn at the shoulder. He was young, maybe in his 20s. Even now, bloated and blue at the edges, she could see he must once have been handsome. The thought shamed her immediately. This is very disrespectful to the dead. Don't think that. Not about the dead. She tucked her hands behind her back like a schoolgirl caught misbehaving. A stray dog skidded up to the tape, sniffed, then yelped and backed away, claws scraping against the planks. Somewhere behind her, a woman murmured a prayer. The children fell quiet all at once, as if a breeze had pressed their mouths shut. Captain Lin crouched beside the body. "Time in the water?" he asked without looking up. Dr. Chin had been summoned from his clinic with his stethoscope still around his neck. He set his bag down carefully. He was a village doctor, coughs, fevers, cuts, not corpses. He touched the back of the drowned man's wrist with 2 fingers, more out of habit than hope, then examined the skin along the neck and the pooling behind the ears. "More than a day, probably less than 3, he said quietly. "The hands are wrinkled, but the skin hasn't started slipping yet." "Local?" Captain Lin asked over his shoulder. A fisherman with a trembling cigarette answered for the crowd. "Not one of ours. We know our boys." "Any boats missing?" Heads shook. "He drifted in," someone said. "Looks like a student," another voice offered. Rumors began to turn through the crowd, slow, grinding, inevitable. "All right," Captain Lin said. He rose, wiping his palms on his trousers, and began assigning tasks as if he had a full unit instead of 3 officers and a rookie. Perimeter. Names and numbers for the first witnesses. Photos from the pier end. Get the breakwater in frame. Xiaowen slid her notebook from her pocket. She noted the date and time. Tide running inward, slow, flecked with foam. Wind from the southeast, moderate. Gulls agitated. She recorded the first 5 witnesses and their ID numbers. Then she wrote down Lao Zhang's words. The sea had thrown up its dead. It sounded like superstition. It sounded like the truth. A cool patch of air slid through the heat, as though a door somewhere had opened. The hairs on her arms rose. She glanced at the water. For a moment the harbour's surface went strangely smooth, the chop pausing before returning to its uneasy flicker. A boy suddenly began to cry. His mother pulled him away, whispering, "Don't point." Sirens cut through the morning. Heads turned toward the road. A white county van rolled down the slope, followed by a black sedan with darkened windows. Latex gloves snapped even before the doors shut. The county team moved with a rhythm the village didn't recognize. Short instructions, brisk gestures, camera flashes barking like small dogs. "Captain Lin?" The man with square glasses scanned a clipboard while Lin introduced himself. "We'll take it from here." Captain Lin's voice remained even. "We'll assist. You can secure the outer perimeter. Keep civilians back. We're primary." A second tape line went up inside the first. One investigator slid a swab beneath the drowned man's fingernails. Another photographed the bruise at the temple, a dark starburst against pale skin. The torn shirt was cut free and placed in a paper bag. A waterlogged wallet was eased from the back pocket and sealed in plastic. Evidence labels began their quiet journey through procedure. Xiaowen edged forward for a better look at the bruise, the tear in the fabric, any sign of algae or grit that might suggest rocks, rope, or hull. A tall county officer raised a hand without looking at her. "Back behind a line, miss." "She's an officer," Captain Lin said. The man's tone did not change. "Behind the line." Humiliation burned at the base of her neck. She stepped back. The drowned man was no longer theirs, no longer hers. The first body she had ever seen outside a textbook. They zipped him into a black bag and lifted him onto a stretcher. The world narrowed to the sound of the zipper's teeth meshing, the camera's shutter, the ragged cries of the gulls. "Initial notes," Doctor offered, not to anyone in particular. "No external lacerations except at the shoulder seam, no obvious defensive wounds. Froth at the mouth is..." He trailed off, glancing toward the county technician with the swabs, uncertain where his role ended. She gave him a quick nod and wrote, "Possible drowning, head trauma not excluded." "Breakwater current pushes in on a south wind," Lao Zhang said to no one in particular, as if the harbour itself needed to hear it. "Anything drifting from the east will stick here for a while." Xiaowen wrote it down. "Captain," the man with the clipboard said, turning toward Captain Lin, "we'll need a list of docks with CCTV, any boats registered to leave last night, and the names of transient crews." "It's a small harbour," Captain Lin replied. "We'll have it for you within the hour." The county van doors slammed shut, engines revved. They were already radioing ahead as they pulled back onto the asphalt, plastic evidence bins rattling in the rear. The yellow tape fluttered in their wake. The crowd loosened immediately. Villagers drifted away in pairs, returning to the day's routines, their gossip trailing behind them like lengths of netline. Captain Lin exhaled through his nose. "Perimeter down. Get statements from Lao Zhang and the first two on scene. Then meet me back at the station."
"Yes, Captain," Xiaowen said.
For the next 40 minutes she assembled her notes. Times, angles, tide, wind, lines of sight, names, numbers. Small details a documentary narrator might someday stitch together, if the world ever decided this harbour mattered. Back at the station, the harbour smell followed her in, the sour salt clinging to her hair and the seams of her uniform. The 4 desks sat too close together for comfort. A fan rattled in the corner and moved no air. On the wall hung a calendar with a mountain no one here would ever hike, and a laminated incident response chart that ended in boxes no one in a town this small ever checked. Ah Qiang kicked his chair back and caught it with one hand. "They barely looked at us," he said. "What are we here for? Keys and kettles?" Captain Lin didn't look up from his computer. "We're here for the people who walk in needing help, which today includes us." He paused. "Status check on CCTV?" "The harbour office has one camera," Ah Qiang said. "It points at the gate. It's broken." He made a face. "Footage freezes whenever it rains." "The grocery store camera?" Captain Lin asked. "The owner says it records over itself every 24 hours. Last night he unplugged it. Says it hums." Captain Lin rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Of course it hums." Xiaowen sat down. The form for initial incident support blinked on her screen like it had opinions. Assist with scene security. Collected names of initial observers. Noted weather and tide. She typed the words and felt how thin they were. Her draft report formed in bullet points. Victim, male, approximately 20 to 30. Clothing, cotton shirt torn at shoulder, one shoe missing, left. Wristwatch broken, face cracked at 10:14. Visible injuries, temple bruise, no obvious defensive wounds, possible froth at mouth. She recorded Dr. Chen's observations carefully, aware she was writing at the edge of her authority. Then she added a line that felt like the truest thing spoken all morning. The sea had thrown up its dead. She stared at it for a moment. Then she deleted it. Reports weren't for poetry. She tried to reconstruct the harbour as a map. Dock lengths, mooring posts, the distance to the breakwater. She drew arrows for wind and tide, and marked where the body had snagged on the pilings. Lao Zhang's comment about the south wind returned to her. She added a note to check tidal charts later. Eddies at the end of the pier, on a south wind, might hold drifting objects longer than expected. The radio crackled, then fell quiet. Somewhere in a nearby apartment, a television shifted into the noon broadcast music, sweet and overly bright. On her desk phone, a red light blinked. Not a message, just the sticky button that sometimes stuck that way. "County will be back for coordination at 1600, Captain Lean said, reading an email he didn't bother sharing. "We'll give them what we have and ask for what we can get." His eyes flicked toward her, softening slightly. "You did good today." She nodded.
Thank you, sir.
For a moment, she could hear the zipper again, the neat sound of it, the teeth finding each other and closing. She logged the first observers' names into the central system. It felt like dropping coins into a well and waiting for a splash she couldn't hear. The cursor blinked. Her hands smelled faintly of latex from the gloves she'd worn, though she hadn't touched anything. She wiped her palms on a tissue, then felt foolish. When she stood to stretch, the room tilted, very slightly, a harbour sway that had nothing to do with land. She steadied herself on the edge of the desk until it passed. "You're tired," she told herself. "You skipped breakfast. You need water." She carried her cup to the sink. The tap coughed twice before the water ran steady. It struck the metal basin with a hollow clang that sounded louder than it should. She drank and let the cold wash the harbour's sweetness from the back of her throat. On the way back to her desk, she paused by the window. In the rectangle of blue beyond the alley, a strip of sea gleamed like foil. For a moment, the surface looked flat, perfect, undisturbed. Then a dark shape rolled just beneath it, like a shoulder turning. The glare swallowed it again. She sat down, dated the report, and typed the final line of Part A, awaiting county direction. Outside, a scooter coughed to life. The fan clicked once, a sound that suggested it might give up at any moment. The harbour smell lingered, faint but stubborn. The station itself smelled of old wood and instant coffee. Ceiling fans ticked overhead, stirring heat without relief. Captain Lin dropped into his chair. Half-damp forms spread across the desk like soggy playing cards. The harbour crowd had dispersed, but their whispers had followed, threaded through alleys, bending around corners. By now, everyone in town knew about the drowned man. Xiaowen perched on the edge of her desk, pen still poised above her notebook. Her handwriting felt clumsy, too slow for the rush of details moving through her mind. The bruise at the temple, the torn shirt, the way the county team had moved as if they had practiced on bodies all their lives. She had written froth at mouth, possible drowning, head trauma, and underlined it 3 times. "Don't look like that," Captain Lean muttered without raising his head. "Like what, Captain?" "Like someone just told you you're not invited to the grown-ups table." He shoved a form into a folder with more force than necessary. "The county has the body. They'll file, they'll test, they'll brief us when they feel like it. Until then, we keep the nets clean. Statements, CCTV, boat logs." She bit the inside of her cheek.
He didn't look like a fisherman.
Captain Lin glanced up. For a moment she thought he might snap at her, but instead he simply nodded. "Write it all down, even what feels useless. Especially that." The phone rang, shrill, old-fashioned, loud enough to make them both flinch. Captain Lin picked it up. His face hardened as he listened, eyes narrowing at some invisible point on the horizon. Yes, understood." He hung up without explanation.
What is it?
Xiaowen asked. "The body's been identified," he said. "County says he's the only son of legislator Wei Guoyan. The media already has it. They're running the news and calling it a tragedy." Something hollow opened in her chest. The drowned man had a name now. A family. Before the silence could settle, the phone rang again. This time, the voice on the line was clipped and official, all edges. Captain Lin listened, jaw tightening. "Understood," he said at last. He set the receiver down as if it weighed 10 kilos. "Case is being transferred. City police are taking primary. County will coordinate. We're background noise."
They didn't even ask what we already gathered.
Xiaowen said. "They never do." He leaned back, watching the ceiling fan turn. "The best thing we can do now is not trip over their shoes." She didn't know what to say. The room suddenly felt smaller, their 4 desks dwarfed by the weight of a case far larger than they were meant to carry. A notification pinged on Ah Chow's phone. He squinted at the screen, then gave a soft snort. "News already has it," he said. "They're calling it a tragedy and telling people not to speculate." Outside, mopeds buzzed past, ordinary life sliding back into rhythm. The next few days blurred together. Statements, coordination calls, news clips she never watched but couldn't entirely escape. Screens in noodle shops, murmurs in grocery lines, neighbours repeating things they had heard from somewhere else. The county promised updates and shared almost nothing. The harbour kept breathing, but the village spoke in quieter tones, like everyone had agreed not to wake something. On the 7th evening after they pulled the drowned man from the harbour, Xiaowen wheeled her moped toward the corner store, her stomach nagging for a late bun and tea. 2 streets down, the engine sputtered, coughed and died. She rolled to a stop beneath the dim halo of a street lamp, fiddled with the key, then realised with a flush of irritation that she had forgotten to fill the tank that morning. The nearest gas station was nearly an hour's walk. She stood there, helmet dangling from one hand, unsure whether to push the moped home or risk leaving it.
"Need a hand?"
The voice was light and friendly, belonging to a young man she had never seen before. He carried a plastic bag of bottled water. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows. His smile was easy, the sort you'd expect from a neighbour stopping to help.
Ran out of gas.
She admitted, embarrassed.
Happens to everyone. Want me to walk with you to the station? Or we can push this back toward your place together.
You live around here?
She asked.
Just moved.
He said, nodding toward the hillside above the harbour.
Seemed like a good place. Sea in front, mountains behind. Hard to ask for better air.
She studied him for a moment, then gave a short laugh.
You picked the right spot, just not the right time to move.
He tilted his head slightly.
Because of the man in the harbor?
Her stomach tightened. She hadn't expected him to mention it so directly.
Word travels fast.
In a small town, faster than the tide.
He set his bag down and rested both hands on the moped's handlebars.
Come on, 30 minutes pushing or 60 minutes walking empty-handed. This way's easier.
They began pushing the moped together, their footsteps slow beneath the dim wash of the street lamps. After a few meters, the young man glanced sideways with a grin.
By the way, I'm Amin.
Xiaowen gave a polite smile, brushing a loose strand of hair away from her face. Oh.
I'm Li Xiaowen. Just Xiaowen is fine.
Xiaowen. Good, then I guess we're even. A push for a name.
He repeated, as if testing the sound in the night air. The quiet between them settled comfortably. The ocean's breath drifted up from the harbour, carrying salt and the faint sweetness of night jasmine from someone's yard. Their shadows stretched long across the pavement, as if they had always been walking that way. By morning, the harbour had reset its face. Boats nosed out one by one, nets slid into the water with a soft hiss. Laojiang swept yesterday from the planks with a willow broom, but the town spoke differently now. Voices lowered half a step, like everyone had agreed not to wake something. At the station, Captain Lin had ironed his shirt so flat the buttons nearly shone. Pens were arranged in a straight line across the desk. A clean sheet of paper had been pinned to the corkboard with 2 red tacks. In block letters it read, Harbour Incident, Coordination at 1600. Below it, in smaller writing, We remain point of contact for the village. Make the place look like a station, Captain Lin said, not looking at anyone in particular. Xiaowen wiped the rings off her desk where the thermos had been. Then she sat down and copied her harbor notes again in a clean hand, careful not to smudge the ink. She added a line she had meant to include yesterday. Wind southeast, moderate. Note for lab if samples offered. Sweet sour odor present on clothing. It felt like tossing a pebble into deep water. She couldn't hear it land, but she threw it anyway. At 15:58, the county sedan pulled up. The same man with the square glasses came in, this time with a younger officer balancing a laptop in one hand. He nodded to Captain Lin as if they were continuing a conversation already underway. "Captain, we've checked traffic cameras along the coastal road. Nothing usable yet. The wallet had 2 transit cards, both last pinged in the city 3 nights ago. Phone was dead when recovered. We're reconstructing movement through transaction records." He placed a folder on the desk. "For your files." Captain Lin didn't touch it. "We'll take copies. The original chain stays with you." "Of course." A faint smile flickered. The younger officer opened the laptop and angled it towards them. A grainy still image showed the harbour road, headlights smeared into commas, a figure blurred between 2 lampposts. "Midnight, 2 nights ago," he said. "Might be nothing." "It's always nothing until it isn't," Captain Lin replied. His voice was flat, but the corners of his eyes had softened slightly, almost as if he were grateful to have something to push against. They signed 3 forms and initialed 8 boxes. County asked for dock rental lists, transient crew names, any rumours of trouble. Captain Lin gave them everything he had, and nothing more. The quiet dignity of a small station doing exactly its job, not an inch less. When the county pair left, the room seemed to grow taller for a moment. Then the fan ticked again, and the height disappeared. By late afternoon, the village had begun gathering around screens. A news van parked by the pier, a cable trailing across the walkway. 2 teenagers lingered to watch a woman in a blazer speaking into a microphone, her serious face turned toward the camera. Someone had strung fresh laundry behind her shot. Whenever the wind lifted a shirt, the cameraman sighed and lowered the frame a little. At the noodle stall, the television sat on top of the refrigerator, its colours too blue. The legislator's plea played once, then again. The stall owner, Yo Ai, turned the volume down when she noticed people pausing mid-bite. "Eat while it's hot," she scolded, though her own eyes kept drifting back to the screen. A hand tapped the back of the chair across from Xiaowen.
This taken."
She looked up. Ming, sleeves rolled, a backpack hanging from one wrist. He had the kind of ordinary, easy manner that made no feel unnecessary.
It's fine,
she said. He slid into the seat and set his bag on the floor.
"I'll owe you a bowl next time. You look like you're trying to murder it with your eyes,"
he said, glancing at her half-finished one.
paperwork.
She said automatically. Then she added, because he didn't feel like someone she needed to guard herself against.
And a meeting that didn't change anything.
"Sounds like the government,"
he said. The chair creaked as he leaned back.
Lots of talking. Nothing moves.
They sat while bowls clattered at the counter and the television murmured. A breeze threaded through the stall, carrying a thin line of salt. From the pier came the soft thud of rope against wood. Once, twice, then silence.
"Your captain looked tense, like someone holding a door shut with one shoulder,"
Ming said after a moment. She surprised herself by smiling.
That's about right.
He nodded toward the harbor.
"You wrote everything down, didn't you?
How do you know that?
You've still got ink on your knuckle."
He tipped his chin toward her hand.
"And people who didn't write anything don't stare at bowls like that."
She rubbed the smudge with her thumb and got nowhere.
It won't matter. The county has it. The city will have it by morning. We'll be the ones holding umbrellas if reporters start knocking on old ladies' doors,
she said.
"Umbrellas are useful. Someone has to be the one the rain hits first,"
he said. She let out a quiet laugh.
You talk like that a lot?
"Only when I'm tired or hungry
he said, a little sheepish. At the counter, Yao Ai called out, "Xiaowen, another ladle of broth? On the house." She glanced toward the chair across from Xiaowen as she poured, then walked away. Xiaowen blinked, then said,
I'm still working on this one, Ai. If I eat more, I'll fall asleep on your table.
"Better my table than the street," the woman replied, amused, and returned to her pots. Dusk slid down the alley like blue paint. The television moved on to weather, then traffic, then a shot of the harbour that could have been any harbour, anywhere. The noodle pot hissed and quieted. Someone flipped a plastic stool on its side and sat on it anyway. When Xiaowen stood, Ming stood too. He slung his backpack over his shoulder, then hesitated, as though choosing his words.
Go home and sleep. The harbor will still be here tomorrow. So will the case,
he said.
That's almost reassuring,
she said.
I'm practicing,
he replied, his mouth quirking slightly. He stepped aside to let her pass. By the time she left the noodle stall, the pier lamps had flicked on, one by one, a row of small moons along the water. The sea breathed quietly. Somewhere, a radio played an old violin ballad that made the air feel warmer than it was. She walked the length of the street back toward the station with a steadier feeling in her chest, the kind that comes after a bad day when, just once, someone stands beside you instead of watching from across the room. Inside, Captain Lin had pushed the chairs back under the desks and put the pens away. He stood at the window, looking at nothing. The county will send a liaison, he said without turning. We'll funnel village noise through one mouth. Fewer wrong words that way.
Understood,
she said. He nodded. Then, almost reluctantly, he added, Your notes were clean. She thanked the captain again and sat down to date the pages in the top right corner, careful, like she used to do in school, when neatness could make up for anything else. By the time she stepped outside again, night had fully settled over the harbour. The pier lights made a second harbour floating on the water. For a moment, she thought she saw something break the surface beyond the breakwater, a shoulder rolling once before disappearing. When she looked again, the water held only its own reflection. Xiaowen only knew that the air had finally cooled, that somewhere behind her the ocean was telling itself the same story it always did, and that she could still feel the brief weight of a stranger's hands on the moped handlebar. Easy, steady, as if he had been helping people all his life. By early autumn, Turtle Bay had almost convinced itself that nothing truly strange had ever happened. Night at the harbour smelled like fish, diesel, and grilled squid again, not like tension. Lao Jiang swept yesterday off the planks every morning. Kids dared each other to walk to the very end of the pier and back. If anyone mentioned that drowned student from the city, they did it the way people talk about bad weather that has already blown past. Xiaowen still passed the pier most mornings on her way to the station. The breakwater and the stretch of water where they had pulled the body from had become part of the scenery again. But some days, when the wind was right, she could almost catch that faint, sweet sour note from the students' clothes, or hear Lao Zhang muttering about south winds and strange drift. When that happened, the back of her neck prickled. Life at Turtle Bay Station slipped back into its old cramped rhythm. The whiteboard held traffic complaints written in cheap marker, and an arrow pointing to "Ask Ms. Pan to move her scooter," which had been there for 3 days. Someone had taped up a cartoon about paperwork. They were halfway through instant noodles for lunch when the phone rang. Captain Lin answered in his usual flat tone. Turtle Bay Station. The way his shoulders stiffened told Xiaowen, before he had spoken 2 full sentences, that this was not another complaint about noisy karaoke. Yes, we handled the harbour drowning, Captain Lin said. The student from the city. Our notes are already in the system. A pause. His eyes flicked toward her. She's here, he said. Officer Li Xiaowen. Harbour cases are mostly hers. Another pause, longer this time. We can come up this afternoon. He hung up and looked at the room over the rim of his cup. City major crimes, he said. They think there's been a break in the Wei Mingyan case. The room went thin and quiet. Wei Mingyan. The drowned man's name had moved through the village that first week like smoke, seeping through doors, clinging to curtains. Then the county and the city had taken him away, the same way they had taken away his body, and Turtle Bay's part in the story had shrunk to a paragraph in a thick file somewhere. They've been reworking the timeline, Captain Lin said, looking harder at where he could have gone into the water. They want more local context, how the currents behave around our harbor, what Lao Zhang said about the south wind. All of it. His gaze rested on Xiaowen, and they want the officer who wrote those internal notes about the tide and the breakwater. Ah Tiang whistled softly. They read your scribbles.
They were not scribble,
She said automatically. It's just one day? Lyko asked. Like a meeting? Maybe, Captain Lin said. Maybe longer. They're vague on purpose. He turned back to Xiaowen. Either way, they asked specifically for your input. Pack a bag, uniform and plain clothes. We take the 3:00 bus. Her stomach did a small, startled flip.
Yes, Captain,
She said. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. The city wasn't that far away in kilometers. It just felt like another species of coast. From the bus window, the quiet coves and narrow inlets slowly gave way to wider, concrete mouths of harbour. Cranes stood over stacked containers. The sea was the same colour, but the boats had changed. Fewer rusty trawlers, more ships that looked like floating apartment blocks. They reached the main station just before sunset. The building was bigger than Xiaowen's entire village square. Glass doors hissed open and shut as people streamed through. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, floor cleaner, and exhaustion. City officers moved in fast, straight lines, phones pressed to their ears, files tucked beneath their arms. No fans rattled here. The air conditioning hummed instead. The bulletin boards were dense with wanted posters, flowcharts, and maps. Captain Lin checked them in at the front desk. A younger officer with sharp eyes led them down a corridor and into a conference room that felt like a different world. White walls, a projector, a long-polished table. Detective Gore was already there. The same Detective Gore who had once come down to coordinate on the cave smugglers. But now he wore a proper suit, instead of the borrowed windbreaker from the tourist station. Beside him sat a woman in her 40s, with short hair and a steady gaze that made people sit a little straighter. Captain Lin, Detective Go said, rising. Officer Li Xiaowen, thank you for coming. He gestured toward the woman beside him. This is Detective Lieutenant Zhou. She's leading the Wei Mingyuan case. Lieutenant Zhou nodded once. Thank you for your help with the harbour incident, she said. Her voice wasted no words. Please, sit. Behind her, the caseboard already filled the wall. Photographs, typed notes, lines connecting names and locations. Near the centre was a press photograph Xiaowen remembered from the station television months ago. The legislator at a podium, eyes red, hand braced on the wood as he spoke to reporters. Legislator, Wei Guotian. The man who had said, "My son had no enemies." Lieutenant Zhe clicked a remote. The projector flickered on. Case 17-463. Death of Wei Ningyan. We'll start with where we are, she said. Then I'll explain why we dragged you away from your nice quiet harbour. The lights dimmed slightly. Xiaowen tightened her grip on her pen. Victim, Wei Mingyan, male, 22, university student, home during the summer break. Reported missing the night before his body was found in the water, according to our current timeline. She tapped the remote. According to his family, he left home that afternoon, saying he planned to meet friends near campus. The projector hummed. At that exact moment, Xiaowen's pen slipped from her fingers. It struck the floor with a small, sharp tap and rolled under the chair in front of her. She murmured an apology and ducked down to retrieve it. From beneath the row of chairs, she could see only shoes, trouser legs, the faint flicker of light across the wall. Someone sucked in a breath through their teeth. The projector clicked again. By the time she straightened, smoothing her notebook back onto her knees, the slide had changed. A timeline stretched across the screen. When the family reported him missing, Lieutenant Zhou continued, the case escalated quickly. Full search and rescue. City police, campus security, Coast Guard, volunteer teams. Images flashed briefly. Command tents, shoreline grids, boats sweeping the water. The legislator was at the command post every day, she said. Press cameras everywhere. She paused. 2 days later, Lieutenant Zhou said, his body was recovered in your harbour. The next slide showed the taped perimeter, Xiaowen remembered too well. Autopsy determined the cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head, Zhou continued. The forensic pathologist did not find water in the lungs. She let the words settle. The injury could have occurred in a fall against rocks, she said. Or it could have occurred before he entered the water. Xiaowen felt the familiar tightening in her stomach. Silence briefly filled the room. So the death was flagged as suspicious, she said. We opened a homicide investigation. She changed the slide again. For the first several months, she continued, the investigation focused on the victim's immediate circle. Roommates, classmates, friends. Campus photos appeared on the screen. Multiple witnesses reported a heated argument between the victim and an acquaintance earlier that week, loud enough that several people remembered it. She glanced down at her notes. That individual had motive and inconsistencies in his statements. We spent weeks reconstructing his movements, interviews, phone records, campus cameras. She looked back up. Captain Lin shifted slightly in his chair. The activity he was hiding turned out to be unrelated to the victim. Detective Go added quietly, embarrassing, not criminal. Lieutenant Zhou nodded once. That lead collapsed. The timeline advanced again. We widened the scope, she said. Financial activity, travel patterns, extended acquaintances. She folded her hands briefly. Publicly, the case remained under active investigation. In practice, she gave the smallest pause. We stalled. Captain's brow creased slightly. We didn't close the case, Zhou continued. But every time we pushed near the legislator, we ran into the same problem. Be cautious. He's grieving. Don't accuse without evidence. No one ordered us to stop. Her voice stayed level. But no one encouraged us to lean, either. Detective Guo shifted back in his chair. Around that time, she said, Major Crimes was also working a separate investigation. Lieutenant Zhou continued. Synthetic pills moving through the tourist district, he said. Clubs, bars, night markets. Several hospitalizations. One overdose tied to a specific batch. Street dealers were easy enough to find. The suppliers further up the chain were not. Lieutenant Zhou clicked the remote. A photograph appeared on the screen. A charity gala under a banner reading, Bright Harbour Foundation. Financial tracing eventually pointed us here, she said. Another slide appeared, transaction records branching through several companies. Legislator Wei's Foundation. Captain Lin's brow tightened slightly. On paper, Zhou continued, the foundation funds disaster relief and education programs. Some of those projects are legitimate. She tapped the screen. But several transfers moving through the foundation lead to shell companies tied to Wang Laoda's organization. Detective Go added quietly, in other words, the foundation appears to be laundering money connected to the pill network. Captain Lin leaned back slightly. And the son? Lieutenant Zhou shook her head. That's the problem. She changed the slide again. We reviewed the victim's phone records, finances, and social circle. Nothing suggests he was involved in the operation. No communication with the gang, no unexplained money, no contact with the shell companies. She folded her hands briefly. So, while the father's activities raised obvious questions, we found nothing tying the son's disappearance directly to that network. Detective Guo shrugged lightly. It was a possibility we had to examine, she said, but it didn't give us a workable motive. She glanced briefly at Xiaowen. Then we read your cave report. She blinked.
My what?
Your internal notes, Lieutenant Zhou clarified. Your observations about the south wind currents near the breakwater, the way certain inlets along that stretch of coast act as natural holding points. We realized we'd been treating the ocean like background scenery. She gave a short breath of amusement. Our investigators know city streets, she said. Port schedules, shipping lanes, not the ocean currents. Lieutenant Joe clicked the remote. A coastline map appeared, Turtle Bay marked in red. We rebuilt the drift model, she said. The red line shifted across the map. We began asking a different question. She looked toward Xiaowen. After your report, she went on, we redid the entire map for case 17-463. Not just where could a body drift from, but what paths make sense for a person who ends up where he did. We stopped pretending he'd vanished from campus and started asking what the water was trying to tell us. She tapped the screen. That led us here. A red circle appeared along a ridge road above the coastline. We pulled traffic cameras from every major road within that drift window. Expressways first, then the coastal highway, then the smaller ridge road above this section. The next slide appeared, a grainy still image, a dark sedan on the ridge road. The legislator told us he remained home that entire afternoon, Ju said. His phone records appeared to support that claim. She paused. But traffic cameras don't care about statements. Another image appeared. Same car, same license plate, further along the road. Captain Lean's eyes narrowed slightly. That's his vehicle. Correct, Lieutenant Joe said. One image might be a mistake, so we pulled the next camera. And the next. She rested the remote lightly against the table. We cannot confirm who is inside the car, only that the vehicle registered to Legislator Way was travelling along that road during the period he stated he was at home. Lieutenant Joe continued. So we followed the slow path, door to door along the ridge road. She gave a faint smile. In the mountains that means tea stalls, noodle stands, family shops selling instant noodles and betel nut. Most of them have no cameras, Lieutenant Joe said, but people remember things. She tapped the remote again. One elderly couple recalled the legislator stopping for food. 2 sandwiches, 2 bottled teas, paid cash. She paused. At first they believed he was alone. Detective Gould continued the story. Later, after we walked them through the timeline again, the wife said something else. He lifted a hand slightly. She thought she might have seen a shape in the passenger seat when the car drove away. Someone turned away from the window. Or maybe a jacket, he shrugged. Old eyes, uncertain memory. Lieutenant Joe nodded. On its own, that means very little, she said. But when you place that uncertainty beside the traffic cameras and the timeline... She let the thought finish itself.
The route deserves a closer look.
Her gaze shifted towards Xiaowen. That's where your harbour observations become relevant. Our investigators understand the roads, she said. You understand the water that carried him to Turtle Bay. She tapped the map once more. We want you to look at all of this, she said quietly, with the same eyes that noticed patterns in your harbour that we missed in ours. In the afternoon, they moved Xiaowen into a side office that smelled faintly of dry erase markers and old coffee. A second-hand fan hummed in the corner, trying its best to help the overworked air conditioning. On the wall, someone had pinned a detailed chart of local currents, arrows and swirling lines showing how water moved along the coast under different winds. Beside it, on a low table, sat 3 thick binders labelled Autopsy and Scene, Witness Statements, Digital Records. Start with the physical evidence, she said. Autopsy, tide charts, the drift models. See if anything looks wrong to you. We had a harbour specialist review it already, but he's from the south, different coastline. She handed Xiaowen a temporary badge and a printed login code for the internal database. You're not here to solve this for us, Lieutenant Joe added. You're here to give us a different angle. If it leads somewhere, we follow. Captain Lean hovered near the doorway, looking slightly out of place in the sleek city hallway. She'll do her best, he said. I know, Lieutenant Joe replied. That's why I asked for her. Then she turned back to Xiaowen. We'll check in at the end of the day. If you need anything, ask Detective Gould. Captain Lean checked his watch. The last coastal bus is at 4, he said. I should get back to the station before they start wondering if I've moved here. It was half a joke, half a reminder. He added more quietly, "Focus on the case. Call if anything feels wrong. Doesn't matter how small."
I will.
She said. For a moment it looked like he might say something else. Instead, he gave a short nod, the same one he used at the end of briefings, and stepped back into the corridor with Detective Go and Lieutenant Zhou. The door swung shut behind them. When they left, the room felt too large. Xiaowen sat down. The binders waited. She reached automatically for her notebook first and wrote, "New coast, same sea. Don't let them scare you." Then she opened the first binder. The city didn't really smell like the sea. Even this close to the port, metal, exhaust and hot concrete drowned it out. That night, in the cheap guest room assigned to visiting officers, she fell asleep with tide charts and autopsy diagrams blurring behind her eyes. She dreamed of Turtle Bay. The harbour water lay calm, washed in the copper light that sometimes filled the cave mouth in late afternoon. She stood on the pier, but there was no tape, no crowd, no county van, only the sea, breathing.
You're making that face again.
She turned. Ah Ming sat on the edge of the pier, sneakers dangling above the water. The same thin jacket, the same easy half-smile.
What face?
She asked.
The one where you're trying to hold 12 ideas in your head at once. You look constipated.
He said. She threw a balled-up napkin at him. Somehow she had one in her hand, and he ducked, laughing.
I'm in trouble,
she said. Hearing the words aloud, she realized it had been a long time since she had admitted that.
In trouble or just stuck?
He said.
Stuck. Big city case. Big city dead boy. Big city politics. I don't know why they even want me,
she admitted. He tilted his head thoughtfully.
Because you listen when the sea talks,
he said.
That's not helpful. That sounds like a line from a bad poem,
she replied.
Hey, I never said I was a good poet.
He grinned.
But you do listen. To fishermen, to tides, to that strange feeling when things don't line up. You didn't laugh at Wabe when he said that was a girl trapped in the caves. You went out on that stupid tiny boat.
It wasn't that tin,
she muttered.
You don't have to know everything. Just keep doing that, listening, not letting go.
He shrugged, as if it were the simplest thing in the world.
You'll be Finn.
He smiled again. She wanted to ask him about the harbour man, about the legislator's son, about whether the sea had whispered anything to him, too. But the words tangled before she could speak. When she woke, the light in the room was grey. The racket of city scooters drifted up from the street. Her pillow was damp where her cheek had pressed into it. She washed her face and told herself it was just stress. The autopsy binder was thick, but orderly. She read it 3 times. Lungs dry, no foam in the airway. Blunt force trauma to the head, fatal. And also, contusion on the back of the skull, roughly oval. The edges didn't match the jagged rock formation reconstructed from photos of the trail. No broken wrists. No cuts on the hands from grabbing branches or railings. Bruising on the upper arms, consistent with being gripped hard. She began writing. If fell, why no defensive injuries? Why grab nothing? If struck first, unconscious or dazed before water. Next came the tide charts from the day he disappeared. The coastal expert's report modelled drift patterns from the supposed fall site. According to the model, under certain wind conditions, a body could travel far enough in 2 days to reach Turtle Bay's harbour. She frowned at the arrows. The expert's map treated the coastline like a smooth line. In reality, it wasn't. There were small coves the model skipped over, rock shelves, eddies, places where drifting things stalled. She traced the lines with the tip of her pen. Lao Zhang's voice returned to her memory. The sea throws things where it wants. She wrote, model not wrong, but too neat. Need local charts. Old fishermen. But the fishermen weren't here. Only their voices in her notebook. When her eyes began to blur, she pushed the autopsy binder aside and reached for the next one. Phone logs, bank statements, email printouts. She skimmed. Texts with college friends, messages from professors, deadline reminders. Then, closer to the time he returned home, the tone shifted. Search history, financial fraud, political corruption, half-written emails addressed to investigative journalists she recognised from the news. The air felt heavier than it should have. He had been digging on his own. There were also financial records from his father's foundation. Donations coming in, grants going out, administrative fees skimmed off the top. Lieutenant Joel's team had highlighted suspicious transfers in yellow. Xiaowen marked something else in her notebook. Bright Harbour Foundation van sighted near Tourist Village Warehouse. Case report, page 17. Same name, different context. A connection, small but real. She reached for the third binder. Wei Mingyan, case, witnesses, family, friends, staffers, search and rescue volunteers, hikers who had been on the trail that day. Each statement was summarised in a paragraph or two, some with transcripts attached. She flipped past statements from college friends. He joked about his dad being too strict. A professor, good student, idealistic. A neighbour. He always helped carry groceries. Then she turned a page and froze. A standard ID photo was clipped to the top of the next witness summary. Neutral background, slightly formal smile. She knew that face. Not from television, not from the legislator's press conference. From plastic stools and street lamps. From the steam rising off noodle broth. From the slow push of a broken moped up a dark street. From late evenings talking about nothing and everything. Wei Mingyuan. Her vision went grainy. The room tilted. For a moment she honestly thought it had to be a mistake. Some absurd administrative error. A recycled photograph dropped into the wrong file. But the name beneath it said, Wei Mingyuan, beneficiary of Bright Harbour Foundation scholarship, partial witness, indirect, to prior gang incident. Her hands began to shake. Suddenly she wasn't seeing him at the noodle stall anymore. She was seeing him under the yellow tape that first morning. Lips dark, skin swollen, hair pasted to his forehead. And the thought she had buried like contraband came rushing back, stupid and sharp and unbearable. If he wasn't swollen, he'd be cute. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it inside her ears. For one wild second, she wanted to slam the binder shut and pretend none of it had happened. Pretend she had never opened the file, never seen his name tied to a case number, never brought a ghost home with her noodle bowls. She closed the folder slowly. Then she stood up, walked down the hallway, and threw up into the nearest bathroom sink. She gripped the cold porcelain with both hands, knuckles white, breathing in short, shallow pulls until the sour taste began to fade. Her eyes stayed fixed on the drain. She didn't dare look at the mirror. If she saw her own face, the whole thing might become too real. When she finally straightened, her legs felt hollow, like she had walked too far carrying something heavy. The neat black letters from the file cover rearranged themselves inside her head. Not case 17-463. Ming.